For well over 100 years, Queen Nefertiti has been regarded as one of the most significant women in all of ancient history. Nefertiti stands as the most important queen across Asia. History has remembered her as the living symbol of beauty, power, and absolute perfection. Yet one particular mystery has gone unsolved for more than 3,000 years. What truly happened to her? Her body was never recovered, and that absence gave rise to countless competing theories. Some insisted she had been sent into exile. Others were convinced she was murdered, while many suspected a conspiracy buried deep inside Egypt's royal court. Now, modern forensic science may at last be bringing the truth to light. Sophisticated CT scans and DNA analysis have revealed startling new clues pointing toward violence, deliberate manipulation, and a royal cover-up so thorough it came close to wiping Nefertiti from history entirely. Was Egypt's most powerful queen betrayed by the very people who surrounded her? Was her fate carefully hidden away to protect the throne and keep a dynasty intact? What scientists have managed to uncover is every bit as disturbing as it is remarkable. It is a story about an unidentified mummy, a vanished queen, and a legendary bust that simply refused to let her be forgotten. For more than a century, the face of Queen Nefertiti has held the world in a kind of quiet spell, serene, graceful, and somehow beyond time itself. Her renowned limestone bust looks almost as though it breathes, with faint traces of paint still clinging around her eyes, as if she had closed them only moments before. Her likeness turns up everywhere, in textbooks, documentaries, museums, and history books of every kind. But while her face grew into one of the most recognizable images from the ancient world, her body was nowhere to be found. Her tomb has never been located. Where she was finally laid to rest remains completely unknown. And now, in a turn nobody saw coming, modern science may have at last uncovered clues pointing to what became of her. What the researchers found is deeply unsettling. Nefertiti did not simply fade quietly out of history. She disappeared somewhere around the 12th year of her husband Akhenaten's 17-year reign. Her name abruptly stopped showing up in the historical record. There are no clear burial inscriptions, no confirmed tomb, and no trustworthy account of the manner in which she died. Certain scholars have proposed that disease or plague may have taken her. Others believed she passed away from entirely natural causes. But a far more troubling possibility always lingered just beneath the surface. What if her disappearance from history was entirely intentional? Then came the discovery referred to as KV-21. In 1817, deep inside Egypt's Valley of the Kings, archaeologists came upon a forgotten tomb concealed beneath layers of desert sand. Within that tomb lay two female mummies. Both had suffered severe damage, were missing their heads, and had deteriorated into an advanced state of decay. There were no names, no pieces of jewelry, and no inscriptions of any kind to reveal who these women had once been. One of the mummies, catalogued as KV-21b, was carefully set aside for further examination. For decades, researchers struggled and failed to extract DNA that was actually usable. The remains were far too fragile, and the genetic material had broken down across thousands of years. Then, in 2022, everything shifted. By applying advanced next-generation sequencing technology, scientists were at last able to recover enough DNA to construct a complete mitochondrial profile. What they found was astonishing. KV-21b shared the exact same maternal haplogroup as Tutankhamun. This meant she was not simply connected to Egypt's royal family in some distant way. She was genuinely part of it. The evidence suggested she could have been a sister, an aunt, or perhaps someone with an even closer bond. For certain researchers, that discovery pointed more strongly toward one name than any other, Nefertiti. But the most disturbing finding did not come from the DNA at all. It came from the scans. When forensic specialists carried out detailed CT imaging on the mummy, they expected to find the ordinary kind of damage brought on by age, burial conditions, and the long passage of time. What they found instead was far more troubling. The arms appeared to have been broken and forced into unnatural positions behind the body. The ribcage showed clear evidence of severe crushing. What made this even more disturbing was the condition of the skull, where one side looked as though it had been destroyed by a forceful blow. Dr. Saha Salem, one of the researchers who helped lead the imaging work, noted that these wounds did not appear consistent with thousands of years of natural deterioration. They seemed to have taken place at or around the moment of death. All at once, the mystery extended far beyond simply naming the woman buried in the tomb. It became a question of what had been done to her and why. The celebrated bust of Nefertiti portrays a queen captured in timeless serenity and grace. Yet beneath that polished image, an entirely different story may be waiting to surface, one that only becomes stranger with each new piece of evidence uncovered. While scientists pursued ancient DNA and forensic clues, many archaeologists shifted their focus in a different direction. They turned to stone walls, convinced that the final truth about Nefertiti might be hiding in plain sight. That search eventually led them to the most celebrated tomb in all of Egypt. In 2015, a wave of excitement moved through the archaeological world when British Egyptologist Dr. Nicholas Reeves put forward a striking new theory. After studying ultra-high-resolution scans of Tutankhamun's burial chamber, Reeves spotted faint lines and subtle markings beneath the decorated walls. To his eye, these did not look like ordinary cracks or natural blemishes. He was convinced they were the outlines of sealed entrances. Reeves believed these doorways had been filled with plaster and painted over more than 3,000 years ago, deliberately concealing whatever lay beyond them. His theory was as daring as it was divisive. Tutankhamun's tomb, uncovered in 1922, has long puzzled scholars. Compared with other royal burial sites, it is notably compact and appears to have been finished in considerable haste. Reeves put forward the argument that the tomb was never originally meant for Tutankhamun at all. He suggested instead that it may have belonged to someone else entirely and was hurriedly repurposed following the young pharaoh's sudden and unexpected death. The person he believed the tomb was constructed for was Nefertiti. Reeves proposed that concealed chambers might exist just beyond the existing walls, and that one of them could hold the long-lost resting place of Egypt's most iconic queen. If that were true, her burial site might have gone untouched and completely unnoticed for over 3,000 years. That possibility gripped the imagination of people across the world. Before long, teams began gathering evidence. Ground-penetrating radar surveys, conducted by Japanese researchers, appeared to reveal unusual hollow spaces behind the north and west walls of the burial chamber. The results were compelling enough that Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities, then headed by Dr. Mamdouh Elder Martati, acknowledged publicly that these anomalies might represent hidden spaces or previously unknown rooms. As word spread, speculation grew rapidly. Could Nefertiti's burial place truly be concealed just beyond the walls of Tutankhamun's chamber? Was one of archaeology's greatest finds waiting only a matter of feet away? The conversation spread worldwide, and the riddle surrounding Nefertiti felt closer to resolution than it ever had before. Could she really have been there the entire time, resting mere feet from the young king's golden burial mask for more than 3,000 years? For a brief moment, that seemed entirely plausible. Then, in 2018, the sense of excitement began to dissolve. An Italian research team carried out a fresh survey using more advanced and precise radar equipment. Their results found no confirmation of any concealed chambers behind the walls whatsoever. According to their analysis, the anomalies identified in the earlier scans could simply reflect natural variations in the underlying limestone bedrock. For many observers, the matter seemed settled, yet the debate refused to die quietly. Certain researchers maintained that the later scans may have been incorrectly interpreted. Others raised the possibility that outside pressures or competing interests could have shaped the conclusions drawn. Whether founded or not, those disagreements were enough to keep Nicholas Reeves's theory firmly in circulation, and that is precisely what makes this mystery so captivating. The ancient Egyptians were true masters of secrecy. Their burial chambers were deliberately constructed to mislead grave robbers, hide valuables, and safeguard the deceased. Concealed corridors, false doorways, and elaborate tricks were standard features of royal tombs. So the question still stands: could Nefertiti's resting place be the greatest deception ever devised? But the mystery doesn't stop there. Long before DNA analysis and ground-penetrating radar ever entered the conversation, Egyptologists were already struggling with another baffling question. Who actually governed Egypt during the turbulent period between Akhenaten's death and Tutankhamun's rise to power? Ancient sources mention a mysterious pharaoh referred to as Smenkhkare, a ruler who appeared out of nowhere, reigned for only a brief period, and then seemed to disappear from the historical record, almost without leaving a trace. Yet some researchers have put forward a truly remarkable suggestion. What if Smenkhkare was never a man to begin with? For years, a growing number of scholars have been exploring the theory that Nefertiti herself may have taken the throne under an entirely different royal identity. Far from being idle speculation, this idea is backed by compelling clues buried within damaged inscriptions, temple carvings, and fragments of surviving historical records. Certain images appear to show a ruler bearing unmistakably royal symbols traditionally reserved for kings, among them the double crown of Egypt and the ceremonial false beard. In a number of instances, names and titles seem to have been deliberately altered or scrubbed away, with faint traces pointing back to Nefertiti's own royal standing. If this theory holds true, then Nefertiti may not have faded into obscurity after Akhenaten's death at all. She may have continued ruling Egypt in secret, stepping into a new identity as pharaoh, while later generations quietly worked to wipe away any trace of her reign from history. According to Egyptologist Dr. Joyce Tildesley, Nefertiti was far more than simply a queen. She wielded extraordinary influence and held deep religious authority, standing beside Akhenaten as one of the most powerful individuals in all of Egypt. As Akhenaten's reign began drawing to a close, something unusual started surfacing in the historical record. Inscriptions began addressing Nefertiti using masculine royal titles and epithets, an honor that no Egyptian queen before her had ever been granted. Was this purely symbolic, or was it the first sign of something far greater? Some researchers believe it may have marked a quiet and deliberate shift in power, the earliest indication that Nefertiti was positioning herself to rule as pharaoh in her own right. The evidence grows even more intriguing when you look inside Tutankhamun's tomb. Several objects interred alongside the young king appear to have originally been crafted for someone else entirely. On certain golden artifacts, inscriptions show clear signs of hasty modifications. References to a female were removed and replaced with masculine language, as though the true identity of the original owner had been intentionally obscured. Some scholars argue that these items were first made for a female ruler, possibly Nefertiti herself, reigning under the name Smenkhkare, before being later repurposed for Tutankhamun's burial. If that is the case, it points to something truly remarkable. Nefertiti's legacy may not simply have been erased. It may have been overwritten and recycled, leaving only the faintest of traces behind. The mystery deepens further when historians examine Smenkkare's reign more closely. Ancient records suggest this enigmatic ruler governed Egypt for fewer than 3 years before vanishing completely from the historical record. No confirmed tomb has ever been found. No mummy has ever been conclusively connected to this ruler. Only scattered fragments of inscriptions, altered names, and unanswered questions remain. This has led certain researchers to suspect that the missing ruler bridging Akhenaten and Tutankhamun was not a forgotten king at all, but rather Nefertiti herself, governing the kingdom beneath a new royal identity. If that theory turns out to be correct, it changes absolutely everything. Nefertiti did not simply disappear after Akhenaten's death. She may have climbed to the very top of Egypt's power structure before later rulers deliberately erased the traces of her reign. Much like the renowned bust that kept her face alive through the ages, history may have preserved only a fragment of her tale while concealing the remainder. And just when scholars thought the puzzle could not grow any more tangled, another mummy entered the picture. Referred to simply as the Younger Lady, she was found in KV 35, the same tomb that held the remains of Amenhotep II and a number of other royal mummies. Initially, she drew almost no attention at all. There were no inscriptions to identify her, no royal objects buried with her, and no clear signs pointing to who she might have been. Her body had suffered serious damage, and for many years she was regarded as little more than a nameless figure among Egypt's vast number of dead. But that namelessness was not going to last. Then, in 2010, everything shifted. A landmark DNA study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, known as JAMA, brought forward a remarkable finding. The unnamed woman called the younger lady was not only Tutankhamun's biological mother, she was also a full sister of Akhenaten. The results sent tremors through the entire field of Egyptology. The genetic data immediately eliminated several candidates from consideration, among them Kia, one of Akhenaten's recognized wives. Because of this, attention turned once more toward the most celebrated missing woman in all of ancient Egypt, Nefertiti. But a serious complication stood in the way. For a long time, the majority of scholars had operated under the assumption that Nefertiti was not Akhenaten's sister. The historical record generally pointed to a different origin for her, perhaps as the daughter of a high-ranking official or diplomat by the name of Ai. That left researchers confronting a deeply uncomfortable question. Was the DNA evidence pointing toward a completely different royal woman, or had the historical understanding of Nefertiti's background been wrong the entire time? The mystery turned considerably darker when scientists took a closer look at the younger lady's physical remains. Her face bore signs of catastrophic trauma. Her jaw had been shattered, and part of her cheekbone had been destroyed by a severe wound. Researchers determined that this was not the kind of ordinary damage that accumulates over centuries of decay. The injury appeared to have taken place around the time of her death. Certain experts proposed that she might have been struck with tremendous force by a blunt object. Others observed that the wound matched the kind of damage associated with extreme violence, raising deeply troubling questions about the circumstances surrounding her death. Was it an accident, or was something far more sinister at work? The possibility of political scheming quickly made its way into the conversation. Throughout history, royal courts have never been short of rivalries, bitter power struggles, and dangerous conspiracies. The damage visible on the younger lady seemed to fit disturbingly well within that kind of world. And so the speculation pressed on. Could this woman have actually been Nefertiti, living under a different name? Was she stripped of her authority, silenced, and concealed somewhere nobody would think to search? Or was she another royal figure whose memory was deliberately wiped away because of her ties to the divisive Amarna period and Akhenaten's sweeping religious upheaval? Even now, the younger lady remains among Egypt's most deeply unsettling, unresolved mysteries. What researchers can say with confidence is that she was a woman of royal blood, closely tied to the heart of Egypt's ruling power, and that for reasons nobody has yet been able to explain, her true identity was lost to history. Some theorists have even gone so far as to suggest that Nefertiti's iconic bust may have inadvertently drawn the world's gaze away from the deeper puzzle lying beneath. While generation after generation stood in admiration of the queen's sculpted image, the real truth about who she was remained buried under layers of vanished records, damaged bones, and questions without answers. If the younger lady were ever confirmed to be Nefertiti, it would completely overturn everything we thought we understood about her life and her story. Rather than a queen who simply faded from historical record, she would come to be seen as a ruler whose final years were defined by violence, secrecy, and a calculated effort to obliterate her legacy, leaving the world still searching for answers more than 3,000 years on. What became of Nefertiti's children? While the fate of Nefertiti herself never ceases to captivate historians, an equally chilling mystery hangs over her 6 daughters. Born into one of the most powerful households in ancient Egypt, every one of them occupied a central place within a royal dynasty. Yet, one after another, they seem to vanish from the pages of history. Their names, Meritatan, Mechatan, Ankas and Paten, Nefanefuratan Tasherit, Neferura, and Setapenra, once stood out prominently on palace walls and temple reliefs. They appear repeatedly alongside their mother during royal ceremonies, religious observances, and formal state occasions. Then something shifted. After the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, the historical record begins to go quiet. Daughter by daughter, they fade from view, leaving behind far more questions than answers. One of the earliest to disappear was Mechartan, Nefertiti's second daughter. Most historians place her death around the 14th year of Akhenaten's reign. Inside the royal tomb at Amarna, a striking wall scene shows members of the royal family gathered in grief over her body. but even this sorrowful image has sparked debate. The scene includes a nurse cradling an infant, an unusual element within what otherwise appears to be a funeral setting. Certain researchers have raised the possibility that Akhenaten may have died in childbirth, with the baby having survived. Others contend the child could have represented a different member of the royal family entirely. The truth has never been firmly established. Then there is Akhenaten, perhaps the most widely recognized of Nefertiti's daughters. Following the collapse of the Amarna court, she resurfaced under a different name, Akhenaten. She went on to become the wife of Tutankhamun, her half-brother, and for a time stood beside him as queen during one of Egypt's most turbulent and unstable periods. Yet her story is no less shrouded in mystery. Within the archives of the Hittite Empire, historians uncovered a remarkable letter composed by an Egyptian queen. In it, a desperate royal woman appealed to the Hittite king to send one of his sons to serve as her husband, explaining that she had no heir and no suitable man to reign alongside her. The request stunned the Hittites. A prince was eventually dispatched to Egypt, but he never made it. He was killed before reaching his destination, setting off a diplomatic crisis between the two kingdoms. The identity of the queen behind the letter was never definitively recorded. However, a great many scholars believe the writer may well have been Akhenaten, struggling to hold on to her position following Tutankhamun's death. And then, just as her mother had done, she disappeared. No confirmed tomb has ever been located. No undisputed remains have come to light. She simply slips away from the historical record. Considered together, the pattern is hard to dismiss. One daughter dies in youth. Another disappears in the wake of a political crisis. The younger sisters fade from surviving records with almost no explanation at all. By the time the dynasty drew to a close, the once dominant family that had commanded all of Egypt appeared to have been consumed by history. Some historians suspect this was more than mere coincidence. Akhenaten's religious revolution had been deeply divisive. After his death, later rulers moved forcefully to reinstate traditional beliefs and erase every trace of the Amarna period. Temples were torn apart, names were chiseled from monuments, and official records were rewritten. Today, the existence of these women survives only through damaged inscriptions and shattered stone fragments. It is almost as though they dissolved without leaving a mark. But just as researchers felt they were drawing closer to unraveling the mystery of Nefertiti's family, a fresh clue surfaced. One that came not from tombs or inscriptions, but from DNA itself. Scientists began detecting a disturbing pattern buried within the genetic composition of the Amarna royal family. This puzzle had moved far beyond missing burial sites or unrecognized identities. It had become a question about the bloodline itself. It was about a biological inheritance that seemed to surface repeatedly across the remains connected to Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, the younger lady, and later KV21b, the mummy that certain researchers have linked to Nefertiti. When scientists examined the DNA of Tutankhamun's closest relatives back in 2010, they uncovered evidence pointing to several inherited health conditions. The findings indicated rare recessive traits, abnormalities in bone structure, and diminished physical durability, characteristics commonly tied to multiple generations of close intermarriage within a family. For Egypt's royal dynasties, unions between relatives were far from uncommon. They were considered a means of protecting the sacred bloodline of the pharaohs, yet the biological price paid may have been considerable. As researchers continued studying the growing body of evidence, they kept uncovering patterns, suggesting the Amarna dynasty carried a range of inherited physical vulnerabilities. Then another fascinating clue started to take shape. The very same genetic patterns that may have left the dynasty weakened could also shed light on some of the injuries, illnesses, and puzzling deaths that surrounded Nefertiti's family circle. As scientists worked the new genetic data from KV21b into the expanding Amarna family tree, they identified characteristics that appeared to align with the royal lineage. Several of these markers hinted at a tendency toward fragile bone density and a heightened susceptibility to serious physical harm. If those conclusions hold up, the severe trauma discovered on KV21b's remains takes on even greater significance. The damage sustained to the skull and chest was already extensive, but for an individual carrying underlying physical weaknesses, such wounds could have proven far more catastrophic. This raises a deeply unsettling question. If KV-21b truly belonged to the royal family and was possibly even Nefertiti herself, could concealed health vulnerabilities have contributed to her ultimate fate? The mystery only grows more complex when scientists look beyond a single person. Genetic patterns traced throughout the Amarna dynasty,